Once upon a time, long, long ago, so long ago that no one's quite sure if it really happened or not. In a little kingdom so far away that no one's quite sure if it's really there or not. There lived a sad man who had two little kinder named Hansel and Gretel. His wife had died, and he felt the need to marry again. It is possible that his new wife was not as nice as all that, but I'll let you be the judge of that. Now, times were hard, and it so happened that a great pestilence came upon the land, and with it came marauding bands of the hungry and the armed. So they felt they ought to move out of their village into a more hidden and remote spot. But food was short, and they were getting hungrier. And one night, Hansel could hear his parents furiously fighting. He didn't know what, but it wasn't the first time. The next time this happened, he crept down from the hayloft. And his stepmother was saying, "There isn't enough food for us and the kinder, George. There just isn't. It's us or them. We can't all live. We can't all get through. We're all going to die unless we get rid of the kinder. But we can't get rid of the kinder. They're well, we've got to. Well, how will we get rid of them?" He had been beaten down by now by this woman he'd married. "How will we get rid of them?" "Oh, it's very easy, George. We will take them into the forest to look for berries, and we will go a long and winding way, and when we get there, we will make up a fire, and we will leave them to have a little sleep and say we'll be back, but we'll never be back, and they'll never find their way, and hopefully somebody in the wood will find them and look after them." Well, I can't say the father agreed, but somehow the father recently had become weaker and weaker and just did what his wife told him. But Hansel crept out of the house and filled his pockets with little stones. And in the next morning when they left and they were walking through the forest, every now and again, he would drop a stone. Well, all happened as he had heard it would happen. And the fire was made and they were left. And they fell asleep, and when they woke up, it was dark. And their parents were not there. And Gretel was in tears, and how will we get home? How do we know what's going to happen to us? But Hansel took her by the hand, and every now and again in the moonlight he saw a glittering pebble, and that way he found their way home. And their father was delighted, and their stepmother smiled a little bit, though not very sincerely. And somehow or other, they got through that winter, and they got through the next couple of years. But then famine visited the land, and hunger filled their bellies. This time, their stepmother was a little bit more cunning. And suddenly one morning they were rushed up and told, "Right, off we go, we're going now, off we go, we're going into the woods." Hansel only had time to grab a husk of bread, and as they went, he dropped the crumbs. But this time, when they woke up at night and their parents had left them in the moonlight, he couldn't see any crumbs. And come to think of it, even in daylight, he wouldn't have been able to see any crumbs, even if the crumbs weren't eaten by something, so they were stuck. They sat by the fire, miserable, listening to the hooting of the owls and the howling of the wolves. In the morning, they set off and searched for things to eat without any luck. And that night, they spent clasped in each other's arms in the hollow center of an old oak tree. The next morning, as they wandered, they came across a sight. They came across paradise. It was a house all made out of gingerbread, studded with biscuits and sweeties, and windows made out of spun sugar. They took one look, and they were enraptured. Now they knew somewhere at the back of their mind there was warnings about not eating things without knowing whose they were. But they were very hungry, and they'd only ever seen gingerbread. They'd never eaten it before, and why would a house be made of gingerbread if it wasn't for the eating? They fell upon it like two ravenous hounds and stuffed their faces. Hello, little Kinder. They turned in horror to see an aged lady who, to begin with, they thought was their stepmother. It looked very like, but older, and with a nose that was longer and a chin that almost came out to meet the nose. You've been eating my house. Well, that means if I am to get back what is rightfully mine, I must eat you. Isn't that right, little Kinder? They stood rooted to the spot. She grabbed Hansel and threw him in a cage, prodding him. You're too thin to eat now. We'll fatten you up first. And with Gretel's help, she produced food after food after food and took it daily to young Hansel. And daily she would ask Hansel to put out a finger so she could feel how fat he was getting. Hansel realized that her eyesight was not that good and stuck out a little bone instead. Finally, she said, well, tomorrow, my daughter, your stepmother, is coming for lunch, and she wants to eat you, and we're going to have to eat you, even if you're still thin. Gretel, get the oven ready. But I don't quite know what to do. Open the oven door, silly Billy. Open the oven door. Put those faggots in right to the back. I can't get them quite through. Just can you show me how to do it? Oh, have fun, said the witch, very impatient. I'll show you how to do it. She bent down to poke inside the oven, and Gretel gave her a tremendous push and locked the oven door, and she listened to the sizzling, whistling sound of the witch being cooked. And she took the key and let Hansel out. And together they went through the cottage, and they filled their pockets with precious gems and gold, and sneaked off into the woods. They didn't want to be there when the stepmother arrived. But soon they just happened to bump into a passing prince out hunting and his posse. And they told him what had happened. And now, whilst the prince enjoyed hunting wild boar and bears and stags, one of his favorite hobbies at the time, I mean, something he just loved doing, was burning witches. So when he heard that there was a witch that had just been burnt and another witch coming the next day, he got the little children to lead him to the cottage, and they lay in ambush. And when the stepmother arrived the next morning, they seized her and they built a great bonfire and they tied her to the stake at the top and they burnt her until she was dead. Then the handsome prince took the boy and girl with their pockets full of jewels back to their father, and, well, they all lived happily ever after.